Hello everybody, I'm Nora Burrows. Today we are going to make some coasters. I made a set of 4 of these coasters a while back. These are a little bit darker than the ones that I want to make today. I made these for my husband for his birthday, and so I wanted to keep kind of in the masculine kind of feel. But we're gonna make more. These are very scrappy, obviously. You can use your tiny little pieces, your crumbs, pretty small pieces because these are 5 inches. The squares here are 5 inches finished, so you need little pieces to go in the middle. Let's get started. I've got my bins here of scraps, really small scraps, much smaller than a fat quarter. So these are all pretty teeny tiny pieces. As you can see, the ones in here are all novelty prints. I have the novelty prints separated outside of the regular prints. I'm gonna go through these and pull out pieces that I kind of feel go together. I'm not exactly sure about color at this point or aesthetic. I just want to take a look at what I have and then pull a bunch of these pieces out. Here are some of the scraps I picked to start with. I had a surprisingly hard time picking scraps for this piece. I'm not sure why. So I'm not exactly sure if I'm gonna love how this progresses, and I may need to change directions, but for now, this is what I'm gonna do. So this is what I've got. This is gonna be kind of my main piece here. So hopefully all 4 of the coasters will have at least a little bit of this in it. They're all ironed. I also added this moth print, which I thought went well. I'm gonna start pairing some of these up, and you would think that I would probably have 4 pairs to start since I'm having 4 coasters, but I'm actually gonna make more than 4 pairs. So let me just, I wanna make sure to have some of this, as I mentioned, on every coaster. And I'm gonna attach this one to the end of where? Let's see, we'll attach it to the end of here. So I'll put these right sides together, and I'm gonna put a little clip on the top so that I remember which side I'm sewing when I bring this over to the sewing machine. So there's one pair, and then I'll put this one on this side like this, which means I need to trim the end off. Put these right sides together, and I'll sew 1/4 inch, add my clip, and put it next to my sewing machine. Triangle pieces are good because then, when you add a triangle piece, you have an empty kind of triangle section, so they start to look kind of fun and wonky instead of everything having 90-degree angles. So let's do that. This I need to have a nice straight line here. So let's cut that, and we'll attach this right here. And I am not going to trim this off here. I'm gonna leave this and just sew it. And then when I've ironed it, I can know exactly how much of the bottom to trim off. Let's get something light to go with this one. How about this piece here? We'll put that there, and then maybe we can sew another one up on this top part here. How about this one? Let's cut this into a straight line and sew this up here. We'll put this right sides together, same with this. Next, let's sew together the pairs that we've created and see where we're at. I have sewn my seams and pressed each of the pieces here. Let's start with this one, and I'm gonna cut this. I'm gonna continue this diagonal kind of down this way. So now I have this piece that has a diagonal at the top. And after I cut, I'm gonna kind of put them aside for a minute, though I do kind of know, I think what I wanna do with this one is add on maybe a piece there, or I could add it, over there, might be kind of cool. So let me think about that. Let me put these aside, and we have this piece that's now a scrap. Let's look at what we have here. This one doesn't need to be cut at all. This one does. So let's cut this one, continue it on the diagonal, going down this way. Now we have this piece here. And we'll trim this piece like this. And I will, this is pretty small, but I will save this one. This one could even start as the center, and maybe I could work around it. Maybe starting with this piece, or this could be a good piece. Let's attach these two pieces together. Here's the one I was just looking at a minute ago. What do I want to do? Maybe, maybe I want to make this piece here a little bit more wonky and just cut it at an angle. Let's do that. I could put in, this is not one of the scraps that I've pulled earlier, but I could just add in this red here. I kind of like that. Make this a little bit longer than I think that I need it. Right sides together, and all my seams are 1/4 inch seams. I forgot about this one. I have this one as well. Let's add on to this with that. And again, I'm not going to cut this off yet. I'm going to sew it and then see kind of what I need down here. How about we put these ones together like this? We'll put those together. We have one piece left here. And what we're doing right here is just creating the top of our placemat. And I will show you how to complete the placemat, to sandwich it and bind it and quilt it and completely finish it. Let's see what the pieces we have left are. We've paired up, we've added fabric to all of our initial pairs, and now we have a bunch of these scraps left, and perhaps it would make sense to sew some of these together. Maybe this one onto here, or perhaps this one. I think that one could be good. How about this one? How about this one onto the top of here? Let's do these two as well. We have a bunch of pieces here now. Let's take a look and see what we have. Some of them are in 2 patches, like this one. Some of them are in, 3 patches like this one. And I think some of them are even in 4 patches. But let's just see what we want to add to. So we have this here, and this seems to be the obvious cut, is right down this way. Now this is gonna be, more than 5 inches. So this will get trimmed down. But before we trim it, let's start just adding to it. There may be some pieces within here that we could add. So I'm gonna put this to the side, kind of trim most of these up here, and then let's see what I wanna do. So for example, this one I was thinking of putting the red kind of down this way as well. I think that could look kind of cool. So let's do that. We'll trim this line here. Right sides together. We have this interesting piece, and I think I want to trim this instead of straight, continuing on like that. I think I want to trim it at an angle just to kind of keep it wonky. And we'll put that aside for a minute. We also have this here. And let's make another cut on this. And what about this one there? That looks good. Let's do that. And these are the pieces we have left to work with. We have 4 to work with. It'd be nice if I could combine a couple of these. Maybe this one here. How about that? So we're gonna trim a nice straight edge along this piece and this piece. And we'll put these ones together. How about we add this piece onto here? And now we need something for this. I think I'd like to cut this again on the diagonal. And then we'll have this piece left over, the outside piece that we can add something to as well. So we can add something to this and something to this. Actually, what if we did that? That's pretty awesome. Or this way. Yeah, I think that's actually really kind of cool. Let's make this inner triangle just a little bit thinner. Just a bit. Now let's see. Yeah, that looks great. We'll put those together. Our units are now getting big enough that pretty soon we'll be able to trim these up, start getting them to be the 5-inch squares that we need. Now, some of these, let's see, I have 5 pieces here. Some of them do not have this fabric. As you remember, I had said I wanted some of this fabric in each. Let's take a look at the ones that don't have that yet, which is these two, I think. And just see where it would make sense to add it. So for example, we could add it here or here. For this one, I'm thinking we should enclose kind of this dark piece here, or at least get something on that dark piece to start thinking about that. Yeah, I think this makes sense just like that. So we will trim this up. And put our clip. Let's look at this one. I only have at this point some smaller pieces of that. Maybe we can put this in 2 parts. We could put maybe one piece here and then one piece there, or just put that one there for now and then we'll see how it goes. So again, we have to trim it. And now we can take a look at our other pieces. I think that this one is probably at least 5 inches wide. Let's see. Yes, this is 5 inches wide, so we can trim that off. Now let's use the lines on our mat here. I'm going to line it up with the yellow line on the mat and make a straight edge over here. And then we'll go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're just missing a tiny bit in that top corner, I think. Let's take a look. Yes. So this is unfortunate when this happens because it's such a small bit that's needed there that it's practically going to get caught in the seam allowance. So let's just make that bit a little bit bigger. And we can add on this orange piece, which will kind of balance that orange piece down there, even though they're different fabrics. For this one, let's put this yellow piece along here and maybe make this red a little bit thinner and on the diagonal. This is the last one here that we have to work with, and we can add that on to the side. Or what else could we do? We have this one that we could add to the side. It'd be nice to have something with a little bit of contrast. We could flip this around, add a thin piece of the red and then put that on after it. And that is probably wider than we need, but we can trim it down and it will be fine. So let's do that. Here is our first coaster top, all done and ready to be trimmed. So again, we're trimming these to be 5 inches square. And that looks great. I really love it. I'm a little bit torn about how I used this fabric, but and I think I put it in pretty much all of them, but it's okay. It's a little bit of pop, a little bit of contrast. So that one is done. Let's take a look at our next ones. This one, let's see how big it is. It might be ready. It might be ready to be trimmed to size. It's certainly 5 inches across. I'm probably going to need to put a piece up here. Oh, again, it's very close, just like the last one. So I just have this little corner up at the top. Let's do the same thing we did. Make that a little bit, make that open space a little bit bigger. How about this leftover triangle of our primary fabric? Next, we have this piece here. Let's see how close we are if we trim this. And go 5 inches over. And let's see. We're going to lose some of our flower, which is too bad. But I wonder if we can just tuck it down over here. It probably wouldn't be big enough. I think if we use this piece here, that will work. Yeah, we'll put that there. I'm going to trim this one a little bit on the diagonal, just a bit, like that. Let's go over 5. You'll notice that sometimes I use the ruler to measure and sometimes I use the mat to measure. I'm not really consistent about it. Okay, let's see. This one's going to be pretty close. This one's almost done. Okay, we have this little corner here again that we need to add something to. So let's add this piece that we just took off. This should work. That should be big enough. And here's our last unit. So we now have 5 units we're working with. I figure I'll just pick the 4 that I like the best. Make this a little bit, well, let's see. Let's see what makes sense, how to do this here. We're trying to make it square. Let me think. Yeah, let's try and make it square this way first. And if I go over 5, and then make this nice and flat along the side. And again, go over 5. And we just need a little bit down here. I think that will work well. I just squared this one up. I think it looks pretty awesome. I have to square these 3 up. This was the first one that we did. So let's do that. Let me square these up real quick. I don't think you need to watch me do that. And then we'll take a look at the tops and we will construct our coasters. And I pushed them together like this so that you could see that you could sew them next to each other into a quilt block, which would look kind of cool. Even these pieces that are the same fabric and touching, you kind of lose the seam when you have fabrics that are the same. So it makes this really interesting shape here. And then this, pop of red sticking out this way and these ones going vertical. Really cool. Now that we've made our coaster tops, it's time to make our coaster sandwich. I've cut batting to be a little bit wider than my coaster tops. Now I'm going to trim that batting to be the exact size of the top. Now I have my batting on the back, the coaster on the front, and I need to add my backing. I just picked this orange polka dot here. So I'll place that on. I'm not going to trim the backing yet. I'm going to quilt my coaster. So what I'm going to do for my coaster is to quilt inside of all of these seam lines, or most of the seam lines. I probably won't do all of them, but you can really quilt your coasters however you like. I've now quilted in the ditch along some of these lines. I think I did all of the lines except for this middle one here. You can see on the back. So now I'm going to trim the backing fabric off. And again, these should be finishing at 5 inches. And there it is. I think it's looking pretty good. Now I have cut some binding strips here. I cut these strips to be 2 1/4 inch wide. Then I folded them in half and gave it a good iron. Now that I have my coaster all trimmed, I'm going to flip it over onto the back. I'm going to take my binding strip and I'm going to put the edge of the binding strip right in the middle of the edge of the coaster, right in the middle. Raw edge to raw edge. I'm going to start sewing 1/4 inch seam allowance, but I'm going to start sewing pretty close to the corner down here, and you'll see why when we get to finishing up this coaster. Typically, you do not start sewing so close to the corner when you're making a quilt, when you're binding a quilt, but we are here. So I'm going to put it under my sewing machine, 1/4 inch, sew pretty close to the corner until I'm 1/4 inch away from the edge of the corner, and then back stitch. Then take it off my machine. Then I'm going to flip it and flip up my binding strip so that it's one continuous line, if you can see here, going straight down from the edge of the binding strip to the edge of the coaster. Then I'm going to flip it back on itself. What we're doing here is just creating mitered corners. Then I'm going to just sew 1/4 inch all the way down until I'm 1/4 inch away from the edge of the coaster, just like we did on that first corner. We're going to do that on all 4 corners. I'm about 1/4 inch away from the edge, so I'm going to back stitch here. I'll show you this one more time. You flip it, put your binding strip going straight up to make that line, flip it back on itself, and then sew all the way until you're 1/4 inch away from the corner of the coaster. And you'll do that for all 4 corners. So I've done that. As you can see, I just sewed, once I got to my 4th corner, I just sewed a tiny bit down here and stopped, and then I have this long tail. So what I'm going to want to do is overlap these here, overlap the underneath strip and the top strip by 1/4 inch. Now you can measure it and do a little mark. I'm not going to measure it. I'm just going to eyeball it. So that's about 1/4 inch right here, I'd say. See, overlapping 1/4 inch. Now what I'm going to do is take a binding clip. I'm going to open this up, and then I'm going to push this coaster part back. I'm going to do, you can see this is open. I'm going to push the coaster part back to kind of get it out of the way. And I'm actually going to even put this clip here to make sure it stays out of the way. I'm going to open up my 2 ends and put them right sides together. clip or pin. I always clip, but if you pin, you can pin. Clip right across the edge here, and then I'm going to sew 1/4 inch seam allowance right across the edge of those two ends. I've sewn this seam here. I'm going to finger press the seam open. Now I usually press to one side, but in this case it's really important to reduce bulk. So I'm going to press the seam open, then fold it back the way that it was, just like this. And now I'll finish my 1/4 inch seam all the way down this side. I'll back stitch over the seam to reduce bulk and just to add some extra security. Now that I've done that, I am going to trim all of my corners here. All 4 corners. And again, when we flip these corners, when they're trimmed like this, it will just reduce the bulk again. So now we flip it like this all the way around. This is the back, and now I'll clip the seam of the binding strip to the front of the coaster all the way around, and I'll show you how to do the corners. So here you see I have my sides all clipped down, and for the corner I'm going to push this straight to the end and then flip it on top of itself to make this corner here. To kind of stick your finger in to push it all the way out, you're going to push it all the way down to the very edge and then fold it back on itself like that. I'll show that to you again. So kind of push it out, push it all the way to the end, and then fold it on top of itself. Now that I have the coaster fully pinned, I'm going to top stitch as close to the edge of the binding strip as I can all the way around. As you can see here, I stitched as close to the edge as I could all the way around, and all of my 4 coasters are now finished. Let's take a look. This one I think is the least successful because the orange along the edge really blends with the border there, but all the rest I think came out really cool. This one might be my favorite. This was a really easy project, fun way to use the little bits of scraps. And I also made these at the same time. These are more kind of Americana look here, just using all of my reds and blues and whites that were kind of in the same tones. So that's really fun. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.